Hello, Isaac.
Hello, Rabbi. So good to see you. Welcome back.
A great day that we will finish the disciple stories because we'll do the last two verses today. What a journey. We didn't have to go to the beach. We didn't have to go to the Sea of Galilee, but we were able to really join them in their journey. Okay.
Yeah. A quick question on this. So they left their nets and they followed him. Would this have been? Would this have been? When the people heard this, would they have been taken back by the statement, or would they have felt, oh yeah, this is just normal. This is
No,
just what people did.
100% would have been taken aback. This is a weird occurrence, and if anything, I think when we do gospel parallels, one of the ideas that is very paramount to Matthew as opposed to Luke is immediacy. When we see the word immediate, it shows up
Yeah.
much more, much more common than in Luke. And
Yeah.
I think in Matthew, we're supposed to see that these magical, transformational, revolutionary changes take place in moments.
And I think, in fact, Mark as well. In Mark, everything is immediate. Matthew has only few immediate. So you're saying that, so
No, as
when the
opposed
initial audience,
not Mark, as opposed to Luke.
look, so when the initial audience would have heard this, they would have been startled. They would have, it sounds like they would have grappled as to
They
why
would
would.
have ran to the beach, look for the net, and try to pick up some free stuff on the beach like everyone else does. Okay.
Okay.
So
So
go for it. 21.
So the Gospel according to Matthew chapter 4, verse 21 onwards. And going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, the son of Zebedee, and John, his brother, in the boat with Zebedee, their father, mending their nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat, and they left the boat and their father and followed him. I couldn't help but just a parallel. It feels like a poem, right? I mean, it feels like reading this. We had Peter, Simon, and Andrew, and they were mending, and then they were mending, and he called them, and immediately, anyway.
So I feel like the reason it does feel like a poem, and one of the reasons it feels like a poem is because you feel like you've been here before.
Yeah.
And the answer is you have been here before, namely in Matthew 4:18 to 4:19. And I think that's a good place to start for a discussion. Whenever you think you've been here in Old Testament, in Torah sources, it's always that you've been there. There's a very famous commentator called the Bechor Shor. He's a medieval commentator, and he's one of the person who revolutionized second stories that are really the same story. And I think this is one of the things that we have to take in consideration. A lot of times in the Torah, we'll have that a story in Deuteronomy is really a reframing of the story of
Excellent.
of
Yeah.
Exodus.
Uh-huh.
And there's different comments. Some commentators will say, no, it happened twice.
No, in fact, right, wasn't that the theme of man shall not live by bread alone, where Moses was taking what happened back there, and he was Moses, right? Yeah, and he was rehashing this. So that's the theme we learned from,
Right.
the man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that comes from the mouth of God. The
So there's
basis of that.
right. So there's different exegetical attitudes that you could take when you have a story. We are going to take both of them just to analyze them from both perspectives. One is just like we mentioned in biblical parallelism, just hunting is not the same thing as fishing, and they mean different things. And over here, there's a couple differences. And the main difference, mending is not the same thing as net fishing. Being with their father is not the same thing as not being with their father. Officially being brothers is not the same thing as not officially being brothers. Being in the water is not the same thing as not being in the water. So there are a lot of differences, and we'll analyze each of those in turn. But the other option, which again, I don't know if it's a thing that happens in Christianity and the New Testament, is that this story didn't really happen twice. This is a lot of times we like to have introductions. How did we get to know the fact that John and James exist? So we knew we had a tradition of Simon and Andrew, and then they kind of say like, oh, maybe it was unclear if that happened to Simon and Andrew or if it happened to James and John, and we had very similar traditions that are different. So they cut and pasted both those two traditions next to each other in the hope that, like, when you read it, I'm not willing to throw away the tradition. I don't know which one is real. this either happened to Peter and Andrew or it happened to John and James. I don't know. So they put both of those traditions next to it. And that is totally something that happens all the time in the Talmud. In the Talmud, we have this phrase called Ika de Amre. There are those who say, and they tell almost an identical tale, word for word, sometimes with one name changed.
But the Talmud is not the Torah, right? Talmud is
All right.
most.
So I'm just giving you different models. In the Torah, we have this idea that the Bechor Shor points out that Deuteronomy will recast a narrative.
Yeah,
And that we said is one possibility. But this is a different story and it happened to two different people. So that possibility can't exactly work out unless you're going to go into biblical criticism and say, well, we don't know how it happened. I think the Talmudic precedent of this Ika de Amre, there are those who say that these two stories we have, then the story happened. We know it happened with disciples, but we don't know exactly how it happened, is one model that we definitely have to accept as a possibility when we read this. Again, I don't know if this is, I know this happens in Talmud. I know how it's phrased in the Bible, but I don't know if this is I don't know if New Testament scholars do this. But it definitely, the reason that you felt, you almost like you had deja vu. You're like, this is a poem. I feel accustomed to this. I know what's happening. Is because there is that feeling that these are so similar that it seems at least the possibility they were once one.
okay. So you're saying,
Two,
so let
three
me.
is not one, but two is one.
True. Okay. So let me try to rephrase what you're saying. You're saying that there's a possibility that it didn't happen exactly like this. It is something happened, and they copied paste this in these two sections. Is it what that's one possibility?
I'm saying there are two traditions that were passed down because we know Matthew was not written when this didn't happen when Jesus was alive. And one of the traditions is with mending. One of the traditions is with netting. One of the traditions is with Peter and Andrew. One is with John and James. And then they didn't want to throw it away because to them it was holy, so they stuck it next to each other.
So what's the difference between mending? I mean, when I look
Okay.
at mending, I don't. So I didn't quite know. I mean, I didn't.
I'm totally ready to go to the next piece if you like, but that's the end of that section. Okay.
But that's one possibility. I think what you just laid out is one way of looking at it. Like the scripture could mean that, or
Well, again, like when I say scripture could mean that, I wouldn't say script. The person who edited Matthew, who put that together, he knew it wasn't both, but he respected the disciples so much
I
that he
see.
wasn't willing to throw away a tail. So it can't mean both, according to this possibility. But it could mean one of them, and there's some version of this. I really feel this is a strong possibility when I read this, because someone who's looked at text his whole life, and even for you, like it feels like that's what's happening. Okay, we don't know though. So now let's go through the second possibility, or I guess the third possibility, if you want to look at the Bible and reframing it. And let's now do what we always do and analyze it word by word. Okay, so let's start. So as he went from there. So what does that mean? It just tell me what this means. As he went from there.
He was walking along the sea. He met Simon and Andrew. He called them, and he's just walking for the bar.
Right. If I had to ask you another way to say this in one word, what's another way to say this?
The next thing he did.
Immediately. It's literally an immediately between immediatelys. There's no gap. When Jesus collects disciples, we talked about last time
Yeah.
about that Jesus was in this juncture in the
Mhm.
call of the first disciples, collecting disciples according to this. So he was so magnanimous. He was such a charismatic guy. He said, "Follow me." You follow me. This time, they didn't even waste the words of "follow me." The first time he said, "Follow me," and they followed. What did he say this time? He called to them. Yo, what up, bros? Come on, you're in the ocean, right? And they were in the boat with their father. Again, I can't prove the boat was in the ocean. It could have been there in the boat ready to cast off. But I think normal people think they're in the ocean.
Okay, so which means, right? So they were in the boat with their father. The fact that they own a boat, does this mean that James and John and his dad, they were men? So they were from Naphtali
Well, again, we don't say they're from Naphtali because that biblical text is being projected into the rabbinic era. So again, that was just a conceptually.
Okay, so okay, let's say for sake of discussion, right? So if you take that text, if you take that text at its word, the rabbinical text, so
that
does
was
this?
actually a biblical text.
biblical
It
text?
was a biblical text that said Naphtali gets it, and then as a rabbinic
Yeah,
text,
yeah, okay, yeah.
gets
But it said with the fish. So does it mean that so given that rabbinical text which says that you have to be from this place to fish and then you have access to the seas, does this imply that James and John and his dad were also from this local region of Naphtali? And secondly, right, does it also mean that the fact that it says they were in their boat, which means they own a net and they also own a boat? I would imagine that owning a boat is it's a big deal. At least, I mean, a boat for fishing. A fishing boat would have been a big deal. So does it mean that James and John could have potentially been as men of means, of wealth and access, and all the things we spoke about Peter and Andrew, and I'm interested why they note about his father, but the case of
Okay, one thing.
Simon.
We'll go to the father in a second. So first question, we don't know they're from Naphtali, but yeah, they're from this region. They're from the Galilee, 100%, just like Peter and Andrew are from, and just like Jesus is from. They own a boat. They could be renting it. They definitely were fishermen. We could definitely say, like the first group, even though while in the first narrative it says they were fishermen, and we learned into identity issues in that, I would say at a minimum they were fishermen. And the fact that they're able to mend nets, that's impressive. Some commentators point out that mending nets were specifically done on the land. And if they were doing the water, then maybe they're in trouble, or maybe they're still on land. But a mending of a net is not necessarily a fisherman. I would assume all fishermen knew how to mend their nets, but it could have been also in that first century, could have been a different skill as well.
Why did the author have to mention mending the net? Like,
Okay.
what is the significance of
For
mentioning that?
me, mending the net is the most important detail in the whole story.
Okay,
Okay,
okay.
so let's talk about that, I guess, first. So the first line we have, as he went from there, and
Mhm.
that shows the immediacy of Jesus being on the act. He saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and brother John. So the first thing before we go into mending, in those lines, I just want to point out Zebedee is most likely the name Zebediah, which is the Hebrew Zavaja, which means gift of God. A very not a normal name, but a normal name probably in that century. People would have recognized it when they saw it. It literally, just like Shimon is the
Mhm.
name of God, it means God hears. It has the own has God's name in it. So too Zebedee has God's name in it, in contradistinction to the two other Greek names. So we actually have this. I just want to point out the parallel in names. We have a Jewish name and two Goyish names, two non-Jewish names.
So,
Shimon is
so
God
James,
hears.
so James and John are Jewish names. Andrew and Peter are
No. Shimon and Zebedee are Jewish names.
okay.
Not only are they Jewish names, they're Hebrew names.
Okay, hold on. Simon, right? But Simon, this is Peter. So Peter's Jewish name is Simon. Simon, that's a Jewish name, and Zebediah, that's a Jewish name. Okay, thank you.
So what's really interesting is that we have in both stories, just want to point out again that this idea of that the story was two traditions. In both stories, we have two non-Jewish names and one Jewish name. They're not exactly parallel. The Jewish name in the first one is Peter's first name. The Jewish name in the second story is the father of John and James. But what's interesting, in both stories, we have three names.
Yeah.
And that's how traditions work. There would be tradition. There's three names: one Jewish, two Goyish, two non-Jewish.
So you're saying is John and James, are these not Jewish names? Like John is
John, as a Hebrew name, is Yonatan, which means God gives.
uh-huh.
And James is John Yochanan, but John and James are the Greek version of them.
I see.
I have a friend named John, and his Hebrew name is Yonatan. He goes by Yoni, like very famous, the prime minister of Israel right now, Benjamin Netanyahu. His brother who died, is named Yoni Netanyahu.
So we have two people in the front, three people over here, but then one Jewish name, two
It's
Greek
amazing.
names.
I
Yeah.
think when you're constructing a story and you think about what you remember, that's what you remember. Oh, there's three names in the story. One Jew, so it really lends itself to the fact that maybe this is the same story twice. Okay, so he saw two brothers. So I
So
want
Can I just ask you? So the author did not mention that the Jewish names of the other people. He mentioned the Jewish name only for one person, right? Was it intentional? I'm intrigued. Like once we start seeing parallels, there's this model of saying the Jewish name or having this thing of one Jewish name but two non-Jewish names. Is that meant to convey something, or is it
So
just
I'm arguing that the tradition had a memory that this story has one Jewish name and two non-Jewish names, and that had to be assigned. We talked about when we talked about 418, the idea that people have Jewish and non-Jewish names, and how that talks about how you can relate to two cultures, how someone who only has a Hebrew name or only has an English name is limited a lot of times in the culture that it could talk to. I noted how, for example, my son Yeshayahu, it's not a name that Americans could even easily say.
Mhm.
So the fact that in the first story, I think it lends itself to saying that Jesus' ministry is one that's meant to hit two cultures. In this story, I don't think the idea is not mutually exclusive, but I don't think it's mentioned. I don't think we'd be justified in talking about how we could talk two cultures. The only idea that we can say is that if Zebedee called John John and Zebedee called James James, that also we could talk about the culturation of someone that a lot of times when people come from, let's say, India or they come from China, they'll have really names that I can't pronounce, but their kids will be John and James. And I think that is, you could argue that's what's happening here, that you have a name that, like, when I hear Zebedee even today, I'm like, what? That sounds crazy, as opposed to John and James. So you could talk about how a father who has a classic or more normative Jewish name would call his kids by Greek names. You could definitely make that point. Okay. But it's unclear. Like, they spoke Aramaic. So he wouldn't have said John. He probably would have said Yochanan. So, it's hard to know how much in depth. We got to always remember that the lingua franco at that time, they would have been speaking Aramaic. They weren't speaking Hebrew. In the Galilee, they would have been speaking Aramaic, meaning that when the Matthew writes John or Zebedee or James, you got to take it with a grain of salt. Okay. Just like in the first story, they're brothers, so too in the second story, they're brothers. So I don't think you have to make a point of this, but it is important that Zebedee is the father. Why? Because if they were out with their father, it's meant to be a family tradition. And the fact that when they're eventually about to throw away the family tradition, it's a lot more meaningful. So let's go talk about the 2 points. So first, let's talk about mending. In the second story, they're mending. In the first story, they are casting a net. What's the difference? What's the difference between casting a net versus mending? If you have to think either metaphorically, symbolically, literally, what do you want? What's the difference?
Just look at these are things which fishermen do. I mean, casting. I mean, now
But
that you mention this, now that you mention this this way, and I see. So there's this juxtaposition, right? Three people again, these names, and then they have casting and they have amending. Uh, um,
I would say, like, I haven't read the church fathers on this, but we can be sure that this is something that the early church fathers would have focused on in their commentaries. Because if you think about Jesus being a teacher, a lot of people say he's a fisherman, he'll teach them how to be teachers, right? So when you think of them being teachers, the people who cast nets are very different than people who mend, as an identity, as a skill set. People who cast nets, as we pointed out, are people who could trap people who can engage them in outreach. People who mend are people who fix situations. They're coming in and they're saying there's something broken in your life. There's something that you can't function right now. You can't fish. You can't even be part of the game because this net's broken. I'm going to come in and I'm going to go and piece together those little pieces. I'm going to be focused on the little things. I'm
yeah.
not going to throw in the whole net at you. I'm not going to try to be the whole occupation. I'm going to go in and I'm going to make sure that you can function. So as a symbol, mending is a very, very powerful symbol. It's something that it shows something that really a person who serves another. It's a person who's
Mhm.
fixing. It's a person who's helping, a person who allows others to function. And if you think about what the disciples are meant to do as teachers, I think the model of a fisherman with net is not opposite, but it's a completely different model than someone who mends.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying this again. The mending here is more. It's more metaphorical, as in
He
that's one.
definitely means it literally mending, but I think that we're meant that, like, the idea that we have these two stories next to each other, we're definitely, again, like, we could, if you have time, go look at some early church fathers. I'm sure that they would probably have this as a focus, because this is classic. What does a disciple, like, the disciples are different than the crowds of John. These guys are team Jesus. So these guys have to be really he's trying to like make his all-star team Jesus, right? He's trying to get the 12 guys around him in order to kind of build a nation. We haven't talked about this, but when you have 12, 12 is the idea of nationhood. If you see that Isaac had 12 sons, if you see all
Isaac had 12 sons now. What do you mean Isaac had?
I'm sorry. Jacob had 12 sons.
Jacob had 12 sons.
And
Yeah.
that's nation. If you see also Esau had 12 sons, if you look in the story, the idea of 12 is how to build a perfect nation. So when Jesus is constructing his disciples, he's piecing together this notion of, I'm going to get all the pieces that I need to lay the foundation of nationhood, which in this context means Christianity.
What strikes me is that if he's trying to build a nation, he's chosen 4 people, all from the same neighborhood, all from the same vicinity. They're all from the same place, and they're all there.
It's a symbolic, again, it's nation in a subversive sense.
Yeah.
Nation, yeah. So but look, so what? Jacob, one of his wives had 6, and then the other ones were 2, 2, 2. Sometimes you have 6 from one area, and sometimes you have 2. That's fine. We definitely have that as a parallel. Okay. Okay, so really interesting idea. But now I want to go to the idea of father. So as opposed to the first one, we don't have necessarily, we don't have Peter and Andrew throwing away the family business. They threw away their occupation. They threw away their vocation to become disciples. But over here we have, when they're mending the nets and he called them, he saw that Zebedee was there. He saw that they're with their father. It's very different to forsake, like if you run away from your father, you're really, throwing your father, as opposed to, I already have a job and I'm changing my profession. Your father might judge you for that, but you're not throwing your father. It's very much, it seems that as opposed to the first story, they're throwing away their identity as fishermen. They have this line, they are fishermen. Over here, we don't need the line, they are fishermen, because you know what they are here? They are sons. The fact that we throw Zebedee in, they're thinking sons. So they're rejecting this patriarchal or less familiar relationship.
This is just powerful, right? This is I had not thought about this, but yeah, they are giving up on the identity, on their family, and so
And we can make it even stronger though, Isaac. You ready to make it like 10 times more strong? Hey guys, want to join my ministry? Yes. There's a third person there. What did he say? Either he wasn't invited or he didn't, or he forsook it himself. We don't hear. Yeah. But not only are they forsaking their father, but either Jesus is not inviting them to be team Jesus' disciple, or even more powerfully, he couldn't be a disciple. He can't be part of the team. He maybe rejected them or they reject them. So there's a lot of like, it really like when you, it feels more easy to accept to say that Simon is Peter and there's only 2 people. The second you get a third person, you literally have a horror story a little bit. You have someone who's like literally not part of the team. There's 6 people so far. There's Jesus, 2 brothers, and a father. We can't have another father. We have the father figure already. We don't need you. You're not part of the team. And I find this is the most, they're rejecting him. But I feel like the story starts off as 6 people. When the end, we only have
5 people.
So I feel this is more powerful, that we don't hear Zebedee's response. When we have the story when Aaron's sons died, it says, Vayidom Aharon, Aaron was silent. He knew there's nothing he could speak to the justice or the theodicy in the situation. And I think Zebedee, silent. Literally, we can't speak.
That is very powerful.
Why is Zebedee not, I found, if you look it up, sometimes you'll see, if you look Zebedee, one of the early disciples of Jesus. That's what you'll see sometimes when you Google it. And it's crazy. Because over at least in this story, taking whatever, and listen to the language. I want to compare Mark and Matthew here, just see how powerful it is. As he went from there, he saw 2 brothers, James, blah, 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 who were in the boat with Zebedee, men and nets, and he called them. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. Mm-hmm. Oh, and it's the same thing in a little different. We'll discuss Mark in a second. But it's amazing. They didn't leave the boat. When they left their boat, they stopped being fishermen. They left there. But Matthew wants you to know they left something else too.
And your father, yeah. And that's, yeah, I was just thinking through that. Immediately they left the boat and their father and followed him. So
let me ask you a simple question. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Is there room in Christianity for more relationships? Is there
Rabbi,
room? Because as brothers, they were disciples. So you could argue if they remain brothers anymore. Right now, they are disciples of Jesus. But is there room for another father? Is there room for another relationship? Do relationships matter? We know Abraham, he was told, leave your father, your homeland, everything. So over here, I think there's a very strong parallel over here that Jesus is saying that maybe there's no room for familiar relationships in
so
the church.
was there a precedent for this? Was there any rabbinical text so as you mentioned, right? God told Abraham, leave your father, your mother, the land you give, and go to the
Yes.
land I will
So
show
we
you.
talked
In a
about there are
sense, he has.
parallels that there are parallels that we were told that people would send their son to serve a master. So I think that
Mhm.
that was like a father's decision to actually like force like this is like a teen angst story almost like bye dad, I'm out of here. I don't know
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it. I feel that it feels to me like a horror. If I was experiencing this with my two kids, I took them out, we're fishing, we're doing our family business. They some guy calls with them, maybe they have a relation, maybe they don't, and they're gone. It's powerful stuff. I think it really has this idea. Also, I want to throw out in both stories. They in the first story they were casting nets, and they left their nets, and in the second story they left their boat. In both of these stories, we have an idea of sacrifice, that they're leaving behind their old life, and they're
Mhm.
almost like throwing it on the altar of this is who I no longer am. And I think that there's very different ideas of sacrifice. A lot of times when we think of sacrifice, we think of offerings to God. But you can also have sacrifice where we have this idea of renunciation, as we mentioned before, but giving up, that you're throwing it still exists. The boat exists, the net exists, but they're putting it on and they're saying, like, they're almost like lighting it up on fire to God and saying, that's my past. And
So my question is, did Zebedee, right? Did he have any control over his sons? This is
I got nothing. The Matthew wants us to know nothing about
nothing.
Zebedee.
No, but culturally speaking, did Zebedee have any control? Like, did he say yes, or is it possible to look at what Zebedee did here, his response here, as a form of sacrifice, as in him saying, God, I maybe his old age, and he's saying, I don't have the strength to come and to be with you, to follow you, but I will let my sons, my sons to follow you, and so could this also be viewed as in his response, in him being quiet in his response? Could this be viewed as as him letting his sons go as a form of his sacrifice, his implicit obedience
So you're
to
saying like Aaron, like how Aaron the Cohen, how it says, and he was silent, and that's very powerful. He had every reason to complain, but he
yeah.
understood that was like the arc of God's plan. So you're saying like that's a possibility. I feel like any idea you say of Zebedee, I'll accept. He was angry, he was happy, he was sad, he saw it. It's really hard, and I think Matthew wants us to struggle with this.
What
Matthew
is the
wants us to
yeah and struggle in what way, right? So that's because it seems
with
so.
familial relationships. I think the early church, again, like I see in this an obfuscation and a rejection almost of familiar
So
relationships.
Pete, Peter was married. We know that because it comes further down. But Peter was married, but he doesn't tell him to leave his family. Like Peter stayed married. I'm sure he had kids and all. But so but here when you say here, it speaks about that the author wants us to think about family relationship. I'm,
There's
I'm
no doubt that Matthew's telling us that they rejected their father because they left the boat and their father. No one would have added their father unless he wanted to stick a knife in your ribs. Okay, very interesting. I want to read you one again a story. Is that okay?
yeah.
Okay, this story is from there's two Talmuds. You'll learn a little bit rabbinic text. One's the Palestinian Talmud, also called Jerusalem Talmud, and one's the Babylonian. So this first story is from the Palestinian story. It's from Kedushin 1:6. It's going to be two stories. It'll take around a minute and a half. So get relaxed. Dama ben Netina, which literally means blood, the son of giving, just so you know. But so it sounds like it's not a real name. But anyways, Dama ben Netina was the head of the city council. Once his mother slapped him in front of the council, and the slipper with which she was slapping him fell from her hand. He held it out for her so that she would not become upset. So this is a classic story of a son honoring his mother. So that's the setup. I want you to, the second story is the main one. Rav Hitzkiah said, Dama ben Netina was a Gentile, was a non-Jew from Ashkelon, which is in Gaza, near Gaza in Israel. And he was head of the city council. His whole life, he never sat on a stone upon which his father had sat. And when his father died, he made the stone into an idol to show respect that his father sat on it. Once, a person from Benjamin, a gem, the Cohen, the head priest used to have 12 gems on his breastplate, representing the 12 tribes.
Mhm.
And the gem, which was a jasper, which represented the tribe of Benjamin, was lost from the breastplate. The sages said, who has a jewel as beautiful as that one to replace the breastplate? They said Dama ben Netina had a gem that they could do that. The sages went to him and settled with him on a price of 100 dinar, which is a ton of money. He went up to get it and found that his father was sleeping on the jewel under his pillow. And some say that the key to the box containing the jewel was on his father's finger. And just, here you see an example of rabbinic text. They had two traditions. They didn't know which one. They put it right next to it. One tradition had the gem under his pillow, and the other one had that he kept the key under his pillow, and it was a box. So they didn't know which one. And some say a third tradition, his leg was resting on the box. Okay. So he came down to them, Dama ben Netina, to the rabbis. And he said to them, I can't bring you the gem. The sages thought perhaps he wants more money. They raised the price to 200 dinar. They raised the price to 1,000, 10 times the original price to get the gem. And he said, I can't give it to you. My father's sleeping on it. When his father awoke from his sleep, Dama ben Netina went up and brought them the gem. They wanted to give him the price they had offered of 1,000 dinar. He wouldn't accept it. He said, I wasn't lying. Do you think I would put a price on my father's honor? Of course I wouldn't. I will not benefit from the honor of my forefather. How did the Holy One, blessed be, reward him? They say that night he had born a special cow that he's able to sell for millions of dollars. The couple of facts I want to tell you the story. Number one, this is a non-Jew. This is how a non-Jew honored his father. And if anything, that we say there's one of the 10 commandments is honor your father. And if he's doing it, all the more so Jews should do it. Number two thing is that it's for the breastplate of the Cohen. That means this is a first century story because the temple was not yet destroyed. So I think that what we see here is how much the rabbis value the idea of honoring your father, and literally that this guy for 10 times the profit would not wake up his father. So I think that to understand the rejection of Zebedee and the actual power of this story, you really have to compare it to the Dama ben Netina story of how much value we put on honoring your parents.
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a question. So in the second story, there is no mention of what Jesus told them. First one, he says, "Follow me, I will make you fishers of men." But that's not mentioned, right? So did he use the same?
Yeah, we don't know. If the options are he said the same thing, follow me, or it could be that they had prior relationship, or he just called them, and that magic of immediacy took place.
Yeah, so this to me seems so surprising that when Jesus was on the cross, he told John, he looked at his mother and said, "Behold him." Like he asked John to take care of his mother. And so I'm trying to, having read the whole story, trying to understand if on the cross that he cared for Mary, his mom, and told John to take care of her, but in this case here, it's this notion of him saying that the John and James have to leave their dad and to come after them. Because as you said, this is your family livelihood and this is your family tradition and this is just what they did.
Zebedee, it's so interesting. Zebedee does show up again in the, he sometimes throughout John, James is described as a son of Zebedee, right?
Yeah.
And it's maybe something we'd have to go through John and try to figure out, specifically when they visit Peter's family. So it might be something we'd have to think about. Why is that? You could argue that he's described as son of Zebedee to rub it in or not. Sometimes it's definitely meaningful, but we're not sure why. Okay, Isaac.
Hey, Rabbi, on that note, thank you. It's lots to think about, lots to process. Thank you.
Chapter 4, man. Chapter 4, the endless chapter.
You're still in chapter 4, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I think this was our 50th video, our
yeah.
50th.
Well, it's still being recorded. It's still being recorded. Thank you. Well, enjoy your fast. Have a great fast and
Thank you.
happy Purim. Thank you for
Oh,
making
hey,
time. Thank you for this conversation. It's lots to think about, and we'll talk soon then.
okay.